Let's get in further details and perspectives now from our correspondent Giles Gibson joining us live from Washington, D.C. Giles, first a U.S. government shutdown and now reports this Wikileaks expose which points fingers towards U.S. spying and those gadgets being purchased. It's definitely not looking like a Merry Christmas for Donald Trump.
That's absolutely right. So I've actually reached out to the State Department here in Washington to try and get some comment on these documents that WikiLeaks have released and say are completely verified. The State Department told me that because of the shutdown that the government is currently in, they are only responding to sort of emergency requests. So I couldn't get any feedback or any response from the State Department here in Washington. I think even if they did have staff on deck and there wasn't a government shutdown, it's highly unlikely that they would be commenting on this sort of intelligence-based information. Of course, all of this comes from this WikiLeaks release that happened last week on Friday, in which there were some sort of fairly mundane details. WikiLeaks saying that the U.S. consulate in Guayaquil in Ecuador, for example, asked for a person to come and count the fish in their pond and then clean the pond. But of course, within these documents that WikiLeaks have released, there are also these details of what WikiLeaks say is these U.S. embassies putting out procurement requests for all sort of spying, intelligence gathering equipment.
Right, and to also look at the irony here, Giles, when Donald Trump himself has lashed out at several countries across the world when it comes to cyber surveillance, he himself being questioned, his administration being questioned over the same issue, but also in the light of the friction that we've seen between China and the US, this definitely looks like one issue which will lead to further diplomatic tension between the two countries.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have to take the Chinese response in the context of what's been going on very recently between the US and China. Of course, just on Thursday last week, we had the Department of Justice here in Washington indicting 2 Chinese nationals on hacking charges. The Department of Justice here in Washington saying that 45 US tech companies and government agencies have been targeted by these 2 Chinese nationals working within a team that they say was linked to the Chinese government. We, of course, also have at the moment this extradition request from the United States to Canada, who they've detained Meng Wanzhou, who's the chief financial officer, the CFO of the big telecommunications giant based in China, Huawei. They've accused her and her company of violating sanctions, economic sanctions against Iran. So this Chinese response asking for the Americans to explain their alleged behavior here really comes off the back of the Americans aggressively pursuing what they say is the Chinese sort of hacking companies, hacking US agencies around the world.
Right, and Giles, before we let you go, that of course is a larger picture in the context in which these accusations and these revelations are coming in. But specifically talking of the expose, since 2010, the United States, of course, has been tackling these charges. Since you haven't been able to, because of the U.S. government shutdown, get any concrete response from the authorities, help our viewers understand how the U.S. has been trying to justify this surveillance since the year 2010, when those reports first emerged.
Yeah, well, as I was saying, I tried to get some sort of response, some sort of comment from the State Department, but because of the shutdown, they're not responding to that kind of media inquiry. I think we also have to add that as far as Washington and the Trump administration are concerned, WikiLeaks, its independence is very much in question. They say that WikiLeaks, because of some of the activity that was going on in the 2016 presidential election, that runoff between President Trump and Hillary Clinton, they say that WikiLeaks sort of independence is in question because they say WikiLeaks is at the very least linked to the Kremlin. Of course, the WikiLeaks will say that they are simply taking these documents they're hacking into these documents, they're taking them from US government sources and then just putting them up on the internet. I mean, you can go online right now and access these. They say there are copies of 16,000 procurement requests from US embassies all over the world.
All right, we're going to leave it there for the moment, Giles. Thanks very much indeed for getting us that comprehensive perspective on what things are looking like as far as that expose by WikiLeaks is concerned. And China is upping the ante against Washington, seeking answers over that issue.